Before we begin, take a breath. Let the noise of the world fall silent for a moment. This is not just a video. It's a meditation on time, memory, and silence. In this lecture, we return to the ancient sands of Egypt. We listen not to the voices that were recorded, but to the silence left behind by the pyramids. Why did a civilization so advanced vanish into quiet stone? What wisdom was forgotten beneath the weight of time? And what part of that silence still lives within us today? If this journey speaks to something in you, support the channel by subscribing and leaving a like. Your presence here keeps these ancient questions alive. Now, let us begin. Double asterisk. They stand still, unmoving, watching time pass like clouds in a slow-burning sky. The pyramids, those ancient monuments of stone and silence, are not merely ruins of an old world. They are mirrors, vast, cold, and patient, reflecting something we no longer know how to see. When we gaze upon them, we think of history. But what if they are not about what has been, but about what has been lost? Not information, not dynasties, but memory, silence, meaning. There in the desert where language dries up and wind replaces words, the pyramids whisper something to the few who still listen, not with their ears, but with their stillness. Civilization, as we call it, marches forward, full of machines, lights, and noise. But the pyramids are not impressed. They do not need validation, for they were built by hands that believed in eternity. Not in progress, not in speed, in stillness. And yet, the louder we become, the more they remind us of the one thing we are forgetting: the language of silence. The modern mind looks at the pyramids and asks, who built them? How were they made? What secrets do they hide? But rarely do we ask the deeper question: why were they built in silence? Why were these giants constructed to face the stars, not the crowds? Why are they so devoid of decoration, yet overflowing with presence? Civilization today decorates everything, but the ancients built in reverence, not for the eye, but for the soul. The Nile once flowed through a different rhythm. It was not just a river, but a pulse, a rhythm of sacred geometry, aligning human life with the celestial. The builders of the pyramids did not separate the earthly from the divine. They did not seek progress. They sought alignment, harmony. The pyramid was not just a tomb or a monument. It was a resonance, a key, a transmission from a mind that understood stillness as wisdom and silence as truth. But what happened to that mind? Our civilization traded stillness for noise, depth for speed, meaning for information. The ancestors carved stone not just with tools, but with intention. Today we build for visibility. They built for invisibility. To be felt, not just seen. The pyramid was not designed to impress. It was designed to endure. And in that endurance, there is a voice. A slow, unspoken voice that still speaks to the present. If only we knew how to listen. There are no screens in the desert, no algorithms, no applause, just stone and time. The pyramid does not shout, it waits, it listens, it remembers. The further we drift into synthetic lives, the more alien these structures seem. But the truth is, they are not alien. We are. The pyramid did not change, we did. And in that change, something was lost. Not a technology, not a technique, but a way of being. A posture of reverence toward the cosmos and toward the mystery of life itself. Today we search for answers in data, but the ancients encoded questions in stone, not answers, questions. The kind that live in silence. What is the soul? What is death? What is time? These were not problems to solve, but mysteries to be lived. in that desert wind between the stones, these questions still live. They wait for the return of a mind still enough to hear them. We look at the pyramids and see history. But they were built for eternity, not memory. And eternity does not shout. It hums, like the stars, like breath, like silence before the thought. The pyramid is not history, it is a presence, a reminder. And if you can stand before it without needing to understand it, it may give you something modernity cannot. Not knowledge, but remembering. What has civilization forgotten? Not science, not technology, but humility, the kind that kneels before the unknown and whispers, "I do not know, but I am willing to listen." The ancients did not claim to control nature, they sought to walk in rhythm with it, and the pyramid was their prayer, a stone prayer, a geometry of devotion. We build towers to reach the sky. They built triangles to echo the stars. This is the silence we have forgotten, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something greater, something eternal, something within. The pyramid does not demand your belief, it only offers presence, and presence is the one thing civilization no longer knows how to make. But perhaps, just perhaps, it is what we need most. Long before history was written in books, it was carved into stone, not to be read but to be felt. The desert, vast and merciless, offered no distractions, no soft edges, no illusions of control, only the raw truth of nature and time. And in that silence, something sacred emerged, the pyramid, born not from ambition but from communion. The ancients did not build in haste, they built with centuries in mind. With stars as their compass and death as their guide, they did not fear the end, they prepared for it. The pyramid was not a defiance of death, but a conversation with it, a reminder that death is not a mistake, but a return, the end of noise, the beginning of silence. Civilization today cannot grasp this. It rushes to build taller, faster, brighter. But height is not presence. Speed is not wisdom. We pave over ancient ground with forgetfulness. Yet the desert remembers. The stones remain, and the silence grows louder. Why do the pyramids still draw us in? Thousands of years later, is it their size, their mystery, or is it something deeper? Something in us that remembers what we've tried so hard to forget. That once we knew how to live slowly, that once we honored mystery instead of dissecting it. The builders did not write manifestos, they moved stone. With bare hands and endless time, they shaped the landscape into a message. Not in words, in weight, in line, in stillness. What they left behind was not architecture, it was consciousness made visible, a symbol of a mind tuned not to profit, but to pattern, to the breath of the earth, the rhythm of the sky. There's no ego in a pyramid, no personal signature, no monument to self, only alignment between man, cosmos, and silence. This is not humility as virtue, it is humility as necessity. The ancients knew to live without reverence is to be lost, and civilization, in forgetting this, has become very lost indeed. We fill our cities with noise and call it life. We fill our heads with information and call it knowledge. But the pyramid says nothing, and in its nothing, it contains more than we know how to measure. Perhaps we do not need more knowledge. Perhaps we need more space between it, more silence between the facts, more breath between our thoughts. The modern soul is heavy not because of stone, but because of speed. The pyramid is still because it is eternal. It has no urgency. It waits for those who are ready to slow down, not to understand, but to remember. The pyramid is a teacher, but only if you come without pride. It speaks only to those who have forgotten how to speak. And in that silence, it gives you something. Not answers, but presence. Every civilization thinks it will last forever. But the desert is patient. It has buried empires in sand without remorse. It has erased kings and priests alike. Yet the pyramids remain, not because they defy nature, but because they obeyed it. Built not in resistance, but in harmony. Aligned with the stars, they do not fade, because the sky does not fade. The ancients understood. If you want to last, do not shout. Whisper. Align. Listen. We've been taught to look at history as progress, one invention after another. But progress without wisdom is noise without purpose. We measure success by power. They measured it by harmony. We chase the new. They preserved the eternal. The pyramid is not a product of the past. It is a mirror of eternity. And eternity cannot be sold. It cannot be branded. It cannot be consumed. It can only be lived quietly, like the breath you forgot you were taking. This is what civilization has forgotten. To listen not with the mind, but with the soul. To build not with speed, but with stillness. To remember that the truest things are not loud, they are vast. They are quiet, they are present. And so the desert remembers, and the pyramid waits. To the modern mind, a stone is a thing, a material, a resource. It is cut, bought, sold, moved, and buried. But to the ancients, stone was not a thing. It was a being, a holder of presence, a memory of earth. The pyramid was not made of blocks. It was made of prayers. Every piece lifted under the sun was not just labor. It was liturgy, a sacred offering to something greater. We have lost this sense of the sacred. We build in haste, we decorate with noise. But the ancients built slowly, and they decorated with silence. There are no colors on the pyramid, no symbols shouting for attention. Yet there is more presence in that emptiness than in all our adorned cities. The pyramid is pure form. Not abstract, but eternal, a triangle rooted in the earth, pointing to the heavens, a stillness that speaks louder than words ever could. Civilization moved on, or so we say. But what did we leave behind when we moved? Did we carry wisdom with us or only tools? We invented machines, cities, algorithms, but did we become deeper, kinder, wiser? The pyramid does not think so. It does not celebrate us. It endures us. It waits for the moment when we remember what we are, not machines of progress, but vessels of meaning. When the builders aligned the pyramids to the stars, they were not performing astronomy. They were participating in it. They were entering into a cosmic rhythm. The heavens were not distant. They were alive, speaking through pattern and motion. The ancients knew that to understand life, you must look not at yourself, but at the stars, not for prediction, but for proportion, not to control, but to remember. What is civilization if it forgets the stars? What is culture if it forgets the silence from which all things arise? We celebrate data and efficiency, but the builders of the pyramids celebrated awe. Their monuments were not achievements, they were surrenders, structures of humility, facing the infinite. Today we build out of fear, fear of death, fear of obscurity, fear of silence. But the pyramid was not built in fear. It was built in reverence. The Pharaoh did not hope to escape death. He sought to enter it consciously with preparation. The pyramid was not a fortress. It was a vessel, a temple, a cocoon of transformation. This is what we forget. Death was not the end. It was the door. The pyramid was the threshold. And that door was not crossed in haste, but with ritual, with geometry, with stillness. The journey to eternity was measured not in time, but in alignment of body, of mind, of cosmos. Imagine a people who lived knowing that everything they did echoed into forever, not because of legacy or fame, but because of structure, spiritual structure. To live rightly was to build rightly. To build rightly was to live aligned. There was no separation between the sacred and the daily. Every act was part of the whole. Every gesture was reflected in the stars. That wholeness we have forgotten. Today we live fragmented lives, our minds scattered by screens, our days broken by noise. But the pyramid remains whole. It does not bend. It does not divide. It does not rush. It simply is. And that being is its message. That isness is its gift. We say the past is gone, but the pyramid disagrees. It tells us the past is never gone. It is present, in stone, in silence, in the way you walk, breathe, and dream. The pyramid is a memory so deep it cannot die. And when you stand before it, if you are quiet, you may remember it too, not as a fact, but as a presence. You are not separate from the pyramid. You are not separate from the ancients. You are not separate from the stars. You have simply forgotten. And the pyramid has simply waited. That is its power. That is its silence. It does not reach forward. It does not reach back. It remains fully present, fully still. A monument not to death, but to the eternal within death. What did civilization forget? It forgot that stone can hold spirit, that silence can hold meaning, that geometry can be prayer. It forgot that eternity is not a place far away. It is here, beneath your feet, inside your breath, around your body. If only you will stop and listen and remember. The pyramid remembers. The desert remembers, and so somewhere inside you, you remember too. There is a strange intelligence in the shape of the pyramid. It is not logic. It is not language. It is not even what we call thought. And yet it speaks. Its proportions whisper truths older than any scroll, deeper than any book. Because the pyramid does not come from the intellect, it comes from the source, from a knowing that is not learned but remembered. This was the genius of the ancients. They did not separate the sacred from the practical. To them, the way you built a tomb was the way you understood the soul. The way you aligned a monument was the way you aligned your life. They knew that geometry is not just a tool. It is a mirror. A language of the universe, written in angles and silence. Look at the pyramid. It is not just built. It is tuned. Every face aligned to a cardinal point, every shadow calculated, every chamber placed like a breath inside a body. It is not a building. It is a breathing thing, and its breath is so slow, so wide that only the desert can hear it. What kind of civilization builds like this? Not one obsessed with speed or novelty, not one chasing records, but one that listens, one that watches the stars and waits for centuries, one that understands time not as a race but as a cycle, a breath, a rhythm between birth and return. Modern man builds from ego, from the fear of being forgotten. But the ancients did not fear forgetting. They feared disconnect. They feared the loss of harmony, not only with the gods, but with the earth itself. The pyramid is not a monument to man. It is a monument to alignment, a place where mind, body, spirit, and sky become one. We cannot copy this. Not truly. We can imitate the form, but not the soul. Because we do not believe what they believed. We do not feel what they felt. We have lost the silence they lived in. We have lost the stillness in which their knowledge was born. And yet the pyramid remains. like a lighthouse in a storm of noise, like a memory too ancient to be named. It calls us back, not with words, but with presence, not to teach us something new, but to help us remember something old. The mind of stone is not fast, it is not clever, it does not entertain, it simply is. And in that being, it reveals something unbearable to the modern ego, that perhaps we have not advanced, perhaps we have only accelerated, perhaps we've built higher and run faster, only to end up further from the truth. The ancients knew how to build in a way that revealed the invisible. Their monuments are not inventions, they are translations of the sky into form, of breath into angle, of eternity into stone. To build a pyramid was to become a priest of pattern, to participate in the cosmic liturgy that holds all things together. But we forgot. We broke the pattern, we built without listening, we moved without aligning. We believed the illusion that progress meant separation from the earth, from the stars, from the sacred. And in that separation, we became loud. Loud in our machines, loud in our cities, loud in our minds. But the pyramid remains silent. And its silence is not absence. It is fullness. It is the kind of silence that holds galaxies, that holds memory, that holds everything we lost when we started talking too much, building too fast, thinking too loud. What is the mind of stone? It is not the mind that asks questions. It is the mind that listens to answers already given, not in books, but in being, not in opinions, but in presence. We speak of artificial intelligence, of data and networks and virtual worlds, but the pyramid knows nothing of these things. It knows only gravity. It knows only stillness. And in that stillness, it holds more wisdom than our smartest machines. This is what civilization forgot, that the deepest intelligence is not the kind that speaks, but the kind that listens, that the truest architecture is not made with metal and glass, but with humility, with reverence, with silence. To stand before a pyramid is to stand before a mind so vast it needs no voice, a mind so deep it cannot be explained, a mind not of man but of earth, of cosmos, of eternity. And when you listen, truly listen, you hear it, not as sound, but as memory, the memory of what you were before words, the memory of what we were before forgetting. And in that moment, the pyramid does not speak to you. It becomes you. The ancients did not write everything in words, not because they lacked language, but because they knew its limits. Some truths are too vast for syllables. Some knowledge must be held in stone, in breath, in silence. The pyramid is not a text. It is a presence. And presence cannot be read. It must be felt. Today we translate everything, we digitize, annotate, decode. But what if the pyramid was not made to be decoded? What if it was made to be stood before, to be entered, to be inhabited? What if its message is not information, but vibration? When you enter the inner chamber, there is no decoration, no scrolls, no scripture, just stone. Stone that has not moved in 4,000 years. Stone that remembers more than you do. The silence inside is not empty. It is thick, ancient, alive. You feel it more than hear it. A pressure behind the chest, a resonance in the bones. This is not architecture. It is invocation. What civilization forgot was not how to build, but how to mean. How to give form to mystery without reducing it. How to house the sacred without controlling it. The pyramid does not claim to own the eternal. It merely points to it. Like a mountain, it does not argue. It does not explain. It remains. You may ask, Why do we not build like this now? Because we do not live like this now. We have become horizontal, scattered, distracted. The pyramid is vertical, not just in form, but in soul. It begins below and rises to a single point. It gathers, it focuses, it ascends. That is the language we lost, the language of ascent, of integration, of unity. We replaced it with fragmentation, with endless choices, endless data, endless noise. But more information is not more meaning. More speed is not more presence. And more talking is not more truth. The pyramid knew this. That's why it says nothing. And in that silence, it teaches more than 1,000 books. We think of the ancient world as primitive, but perhaps it is we who are primitive, still blind to the sacred structure of being, still building without center, still living without alignment, still afraid of silence, because in silence we meet ourselves. The pyramid does not move, but it changes you. You stand before it and something in you stills, something old, something soft. You remember what time used to feel like before clocks. You remember what power used to feel like before control. You remember what awe feels like when it is real. The pyramid is not from another world. It is from this world, but from a time when the world was still whole, when heaven and earth were not separate, when man was not alien to the stars, when death was not feared, but prepared for with reverence. Not an end, a return. This is what civilization forgot. The pyramid was not made to defy death, but to complete it. Not to preserve the body, but to align the soul. Its geometry is not just technical, it is spiritual. The square base is earth. The four sides are the elements. The point above is the unseen. The journey upward is the journey inward. You don't need to believe this. You only need to feel it. And when you do, the pyramid becomes a mirror. It shows you your shape. It shows you your disconnection. And then, if you're quiet, it begins to show you the way back. Not through technology, not through belief, but through presence, through remembering, through stillness. You were never meant to run forever. You were meant to stop, to breathe, to return. The pyramid remembers that return. It was built for it. And though sand buries it, and time forgets it, and minds dismiss it, it remains. The silence of the pyramid is not a mystery to solve. It is an invitation. It asks nothing. It demands nothing. It simply waits for you, for your stillness, for your listening. And when you listen, not with ears, but with being, you will hear the lost language, the language that has no grammar, no words, no beginning, the language of eternity. And in that language, you will remember what civilization once knew. That stone can speak. That silence can teach. That stillness can heal. And that you are not separate from the stars, only sleeping. But the pyramid is awake, and it remembers you. The pyramid does not age. It erodes, yes, but it does not decay. It stands as if waiting for something, or perhaps remembering something we have forgotten. Its stones stare out over the desert like eyes that do not blink, keeping watch while empires rise and fall, while ideologies burn and vanish like mirages. Every civilization is born with a dream of permanence, of power, of glory, and yet every one of them fades. Rome, Babylon, Atlantis. They pass through time like smoke, leaving behind only fragments, ruins, and questions. But the pyramid endures, not because it was mightier, but because it was quieter, because it was aligned, not only with the stars, but with something deeper, with the eternal pulse of the universe. There are eyes carved in stone on some ancient tombs. The eye of Horus, the eye of Ra. But the real eyes were never in the carvings. The real eyes are the pyramids themselves. They look not just across space, but across time. They are not watching the world. They are watching us. Watching to see if we will remember who we were before we became machines in human skin. The pyramid is not ancient because it is old. It is ancient because it remembers what the soul knew before it was broken by noise. It remembers the sacredness of time, the reverence for cycles, the humility before mystery. Today we worship clarity, speed, precision. But the pyramid is none of these. It is vague. It is slow. It is uncertain. And in that uncertainty, it holds truth. Modern civilization hates what it cannot measure. But not everything that matters can be measured. Not everything that is real can be proven. The pyramid is not proven. It is present. And its presence is enough. Enough to unsettle the proud. Enough to humble the clever. Enough to awaken something ancient in you. Think about this. The people who built the pyramids never saw them finished. They worked for something that would outlive them. That is not labor. That is devotion. That is not architecture. That is offering. We build for now. They built for forever. We build with budgets. They built with belief. The eyes of the pyramid are patient. They do not judge. They do not blink. But they see. And what they see is a world spinning out of its axis. Not physically, but spiritually. We have more control than ever before. And yet we are lost. We have more knowledge. And yet we are afraid. We are connected, and yet we are alone. The pyramid watches not to punish, but to remind. To remind us that there was a time when civilization meant alignment, when building was prayer, when stone was sacred, when silence was wisdom. That time was not primitive. It was precise, not in code, but in consciousness. What would happen if we built again like that? Not with ambition, but with reverence, not for profit, but for meaning. What would it look like to construct a culture that was not afraid of death, but honored it? That did not flee mystery, but entered it? The pyramid asks no such questions. It already holds the answers, not in words, but in weight, in shadow, in breath, in geometry that speaks not to the mind, but to the spirit. The pyramid has eyes, but it is we who must learn to see, not through the lens of science or religion, but through stillness, not through certainty, but through surrender. The pyramid is not a riddle to be solved. It is a teacher to be approached in humility. And the first lesson is this: you do not need to know, you only need to listen. The pyramid listens to the stars, to the winds, to the bones of the earth. It has no screens, no noise, no instructions, only presence. And in that presence it sees clearly, not the way we see, in bits and fragments, but the way eternity sees, whole, slow, unshaken. So come, stand before it, look into the stone that does not blink, look into a silence that is older than your language. Feel a presence that is not yours, and yet somehow is. And in that stillness, something ancient in you will begin to stir. Something that has no name because it existed before naming. Something that has no face because it existed before form. Something that watches through your eyes now, remembering the stars. The pyramid does not speak because it sees. And now so do you. What happens to a mind that walks inside perfect geometry? What happens to a heart that beats within the belly of sacred proportion? These were not buildings for shelter. These were machines for memory. Temples not just for gods, but for being itself. The pyramid is not a structure, it is a symbol too vast to decode, too precise to dismiss. To understand its silence, we must remember that the ancients did not separate science from spirit, nor math from myth. Geometry was not cold measurement, it was music, harmony, divine order. The shape of the pyramid is not arbitrary, it reflects the cosmos. 4 sides rise from earth to a single point in the sky. As above, so below. Unity rising from multiplicity. This was not mere architecture, this was alchemy, a sacred science of shape, a translation of eternity into form. In the West, we have lost this vision. We see geometry as neutral, triangles, squares, angles. But to the builders, these were living archetypes. They believed certain shapes could focus energy, elevate consciousness, align the soul. The pyramid, in this way, is not just a monument. It is a mirror for the divine. It is not built on belief. It is built on resonance. The way a tuning fork sings when it meets the right frequency. That is why, even today, when you stand in the king's chamber and hum, the walls hum back. The stone listens, not symbolically, but literally. This is the forgotten truth of civilization, that matter is not mute. Stone can speak if you know how to listen. Shape can guide if you know how to feel. The ancients knew this. They did not need screens to communicate. They needed intention. They needed silence. They needed form. We believe the soul is invisible, unknowable. But perhaps the soul has a shape. Perhaps it can be remembered through structure. Perhaps it too ascends from the square base of experience to the point of unity. The pyramid does not just point to the sky. It shows us how to rise. Each block placed with purpose, each angle echoing the sun, each proportion tied to stars. You do not merely enter the pyramid. You enter a pattern the soul remembers even if the mind forgets. In this sacred geometry, nothing is random. The height of the Great Pyramid multiplied by 1,000 gives you the average distance to the sun. Its base divided by twice its height gives you pi. These are not coincidences. They are messages, not in words, but in number, in ratio, in rhythm. Today we call this superstition. But perhaps we are the ones asleep. Perhaps our cold precision has numbed us to the warm intelligence of form. The pyramid teaches not through explanation, but through presence. Stand within it and you are changed. Not by doctrine, but by design. The ancients built what we cannot explain, not because they had more tools, but because they had more alignment, more coherence. Their lives were not distracted. Their knowledge was not fragmented. They lived in rhythm with sky and season. They listened to silence. They followed form. They obeyed the invisible. That obedience was not weakness. It was wisdom. It was respect for the structure of reality. A structure echoed in the triangle, in the golden ratio, in the orbit of the stars. We build upward for power. They built upward for reverence. We seek height. They sought harmony. That is what civilization has forgotten. That building was once prayer. That geometry was once medicine. That form was once a path to the formless. So the pyramid remains, not just to be seen, but to be remembered. Not just as a wonder, but as a whisper that says, you too are built in sacred shape. You too are made for ascent. Align your life and you will rise. The geometry of the pyramid is the geometry of the soul. 4 sides, 1 point, many selves, 1 source. And in that shape, in that stillness, the silence speaks. We move through time as though it were a river flowing forward. But what if that motion is an illusion? What if time is not a line, but a circle or better, a spiral, endlessly turning, returning, evolving. The builders of the pyramids did not see time as we do. To them, it was not something to escape, but something to align with, not a trap, but a rhythm. The modern world sees history as progress, a straight path from darkness into light, from ignorance into enlightenment. But the pyramid stands to remind us, not all that is new is better, and not all that is old is gone. There is a kind of knowledge that does not age. It waits, patiently, in stone. The pyramid doesn't move, but time moves around it. Generations pass, cultures change, but the angle of the stone does not shift. In that stillness, we find a new way to understand time, not as passing, but as returning. The solstices come again, the stars repeat their paths, the soul circles back to what it once knew. Inside the ancient world, the year was not just a calendar, it was a sacred wheel, a story told through seasons, a pulse shared with the heavens. The Egyptians aligned their temples to the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star whose return marked the Nile's flooding, and with it renewal. To them, the sky was not distant. It was a dialogue. This is the time the pyramids remember, not mechanical time, not the clock, but cosmic time. A time that breathes, that sings, that invites you to move not faster but deeper. We measure time with machines. They measured time with myth. They wove the movement of the stars into stories, into symbols, into rites. These were not primitive guesses. They were mirrors of the soul's own cycles, descent and ascent, death and rebirth. The pyramid itself embodies this. Beneath it, chambers of darkness. Above it, a point toward the light. Descent into matter, then return to source. The journey of the soul is carved into the stone, not through words, but through shape, through space, through the still ticking of eternity. We fear time because we think it is taking from us, but the ancients honored it not as a thief, but as a teacher. Each moment was not something to waste, but to witness, to inhabit fully. That's why the pyramid doesn't rush. It doesn't age with panic. It holds time like a bowl holds water. And we, in our anxiety, in our constant acceleration, are like hands shaking the bowl. We spill meaning in our pursuit of speed. But meaning does not move fast. It waits for those who slow down. For those who can sit in silence, as stone does. For those who understand that every second is sacred. The pyramid does not speak of time in hours. It speaks of ages, of epochs, of the long memory of the earth. It holds a timeline we can't yet read, but one that reads us. It reflects our forgetting, our hubris, our haste, and yet it also reflects our longing, our ache for something enduring. We build skyscrapers that touch the clouds, but they do not last. We invent technologies that stretch across the planet, but they do not satisfy. The pyramid does not reach high, it reaches deep, into mystery, into myth, into memory. It is rooted, not rising. And in that rootedness, it becomes eternal. What if civilization is not just about advancing forward, but returning inward? What if time is not a race, but a dance? What if the silence of the pyramid is not emptiness, but rhythm? A rhythm we've forgotten how to hear? There is a time that is not measured by seconds, a time that is felt in the bones, a time that beats beneath thought. That is the time the pyramid teaches, and it does so in silence. It does not explain, it reminds. Long before the word science was spoken in modern tongues, it was lived in ancient stones. The pyramid is not a relic of superstition. It is the embodiment of a science so ancient, so refined, that it no longer needed to separate the measurable from the meaningful. In those days, there was no division between physics and philosophy, astronomy and theology, medicine and mysticism. Knowledge was whole, sacred, alive. To the builders, the world was not just matter, it was mind, ordered, intelligent, humming with pattern. And to understand the world was not simply to know it, it was to honor it. The pursuit of truth was not cold analysis, but communion. Every angle of the pyramid was tuned, not just to stars, but to frequencies, not just to structure, but to spirit. It was a resonance chamber, a meditation device, a map of the cosmos carved into Earth's own bones. Its precision is not accidental. It speaks to a mastery that modern minds still struggle to accept, not because we lack evidence, but because we lack humility. How could they have done this? We ask. With no cranes, no computers, no steel, and yet here it stands. Leveled to a fraction of a degree, aligned to true north more precisely than any modern building, embedded with ratios found in nature, in music, in galaxies. We forget that intelligence is not a function of our machines. It is a function of our alignment. The ancients were not distracted. Their world was not cluttered with noise. They studied the movement of stars not from curiosity alone, but because they believed that to align with the heavens was to align with truth. This was the sacred science, not of control, but of coherence, not of dominance, but of dance. A science that did not strip the soul from the equation, but placed it at the center. Consider the healing chambers within the pyramid, rooms where sound resonates in strange, perfect ways, where one tone vibrates your bones, another your breath. Is it possible they knew of sonic healing, of frequency as medicine? We now return to these ideas with curiosity, but to them they were ancient truths, truths so obvious they were set in stone. We call it myth. They called it memory. To us, myth is fiction. To them, it was how truth was carried when language fell short. Symbols were not decorations. They were tools, technologies for the inner world. The scarab, the ankh, the eye, not just icons, but instructions. Keys to unlock perception. They believed symbols had power, that to see a symbol was to awaken something within you. And so they carved them into eternity. They studied not just the stars above, but the stars within, the mind, the soul, consciousness. What we now call psychology, they practiced through initiation, through sacred rites, through temples that taught in silence. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a teacher, a school of stone, a monastery of mathematics. Its lessons are not written, but felt, and only those willing to unlearn modern certainty can begin to hear them. We ask where their knowledge went, but perhaps the better question is, where did our reverence go? Where did our sense of the sacred disappear? When did we decide that to know was to dominate, not to serve? When did science become divorced from wonder? The pyramid holds no grudge. It does not demand belief. It waits, patiently, because the sacred science it was built upon does not need defending. It needs remembering. When we finally sit long enough in its silence, long enough to drop our pride, something ancient returns. A hum, a pulse, a rhythm beneath thought, a sense that the universe is not just observable, it is alive, and it is whispering through shape, through proportion, through silence. And so we listen, not with the ears, but with the soul. The pyramid was never meant to be entered by tourists. It was meant to be entered by seekers. Each corridor was a threshold, each chamber a mirror, This was not architecture for comfort. It was architecture for transformation. The journey through its passageways was not just physical, but symbolic. You entered not only into stone, but into yourself. The ancient Egyptians did not merely bury their kings in these monuments, they initiated them. For the pyramid is more than a tomb. It is a path, a ritual, a test. The descent into the pyramid mimicked death. The stillness within symbolized rebirth, and the emergence from its darkness pointed toward something more than life. It pointed toward awakening. Initiation was not taught through books. It was lived. It was embodied. You walked into the stone and faced yourself, your fear, your attachments, your illusions. The pyramid did not explain anything. It stripped you. And in that stripping, something higher could emerge. What did they believe happened in those dark chambers deep beneath the surface? They believed the soul was restructured, that surrounded by sacred angles, beneath tons of timeless stone, the ego dissolved, the personality melted, and what remained was something eternal, the Ka, the soul force, ready to ascend beyond the illusion of form. This was not superstition, it was precision. The corridors were angled not just to align with stars, but to guide inner processes. The entire structure functioned like a cosmic womb, enclosing, compressing, transforming. You entered as one thing, you emerged as another. The sounds in the king's chamber resonate at 432 hertz, a frequency modern physicists now associate with harmony, healing, coherence. Did the ancients know this, or did they feel it? Is there a difference? Perhaps they knew what we forget, that true knowledge is not data. It is embodied resonance. Initiation is not a word we use anymore. Our culture avoids thresholds. We prefer comfort over change. But the ancient world did not flinch from transformation. They built temples to provoke it. They understood that growth is not linear. It is spiral, painful, sacred, and above all, it must be chosen. You were not forced to enter the pyramid. You were invited. And if you entered, it meant you were ready to die, not physically, but symbolically. Ready to shed the false self, to bury illusion, to kneel before something greater than understanding, mystery. And perhaps that is what civilization has forgotten most deeply. Not just the science or the symbols or the stones, but the journey, the internal descent into darkness that leads to light, the sacred act of facing the unknown, the willingness to pass through silence and not demand answers, but to receive what emerges. Today we stand at the base of the pyramid and take photos. We speak of mystery as tourists. But those who walked into the heart of that structure did so in reverence, in silence, with hearts wide open and egos surrendered. They knew what we are only beginning to remember, that wisdom cannot be taught. It must be earned. The pyramid is not a lesson. It is an invitation. And even now, after millennia, it still calls. It calls to the part of you that remembers, that longs, that aches to strip away the noise, to step out of time, to return to the still stone chamber where your name falls away, where your mind dissolves, and all that remains is breath and stone and soul. This is the silence the pyramid speaks. Not emptiness, but the silence before creation, the space where something new can be born. You were never meant to merely observe the pyramid. You were meant to walk into it, and in doing so, walk into yourself. What is hidden in a triangle? What lives inside a square, a circle, a golden ratio? These are not just shapes. They are echoes of the divine. The pyramid is geometry turned sacred, not merely for beauty, not merely for strength, but because shape is the language of order, and order is the fingerprint of consciousness. The ancients did not carve without reason. Every line, every angle, every ratio within the pyramid reflects a principle of balance, of harmony, of cosmic truth. Geometry to them was not mathematics, it was revelation. They saw that nature builds through patterns, the spiral of a galaxy, the swirl of a shell, the unfolding of a fern. These are not random, they are precise, repeating, divine. And so to build in harmony with those patterns was to align yourself with the intelligence that made the world. The base of the Great Pyramid is nearly a perfect square. Its sides face the cardinal directions with astonishing accuracy. Its height and perimeter reflect the proportions of the earth itself. Some say the builders encoded not just philosophy, but physics, measuring the curvature of the planet, the speed of light, even the dimensions of the earth and moon. Were these coincidences, or were they messages? To measure is to observe, but to design with such knowledge is to embody. The pyramid is not just aligned with the stars, it is a mirror of them. As above, so below. This was the core belief, that what we build on earth must reflect the order of the heavens. That harmony is not just beauty, it is truth. The Egyptians believed that Ma'at, cosmic balance, was the force that held all life together. And to break that harmony was to fall into chaos. Their temples, their laws, even their hearts were judged by how closely they aligned to that balance. This is why geometry mattered. Not because it made structures stronger, but because it made them sacred. To live within a proportioned space was to be reminded daily of your place in the cosmos, of your duty to walk in balance, to be upright, to be true. Modern buildings are efficient, but the pyramid was eternal. It was not made to please the eye, but to train the soul. Its slope is not arbitrary. At 51 degrees, it encodes the golden ratio, the same found in sunflowers and seashells and hurricanes and galaxies. That ratio is not aesthetic. It is fundamental. It is the curve of becoming. When you stand beneath that slope, something shifts in you. Not because you understand it, but because you feel it. You are standing inside mathematics that breathes, inside logic that sings, inside form that remembers. The pyramid does not teach by speaking, it teaches by shape. And to those who can feel the resonance of form, it reveals what words cannot hold. That creation is not chaos, that life is not random, that the universe is not a machine, but a mind dreaming in patterns. And we, when we build with reverence, are part of that dream. But we've forgotten how to build with soul. Our cities rise fast and fall faster. Concrete replaces stone, steel replaces spirit, and geometry becomes function, not worship. We design for utility, not harmony. Yet the pyramid remains, not just as monument, but as memory, a reminder of a time when building was prayer, when structure was sacrifice, when shape was a language spoken between humanity and the heavens. To recover that memory is not to go backward, it is to go inward, to ask, what am I aligned with? What shapes my life? What structures hold my soul? The pyramid shows us to live well is to live in alignment with stars, with silence, with self. Its geometry is not just of stone, it is of truth. In the long corridors of forgotten time, there walked a class of beings who did not rule through fear or gold, but through knowledge. They were not kings, they were not gods. They were the priests, keepers of wisdom, guardians of balance, midwives of the sacred. These men, and sometimes women, lived lives most cannot imagine. Not lavish, not loud, but inward, focused, sacred. They were trained not just in ritual, but in astronomy, healing, philosophy, geometry, and music. In their minds, the soul and the star were not separate. They were reflections. The priesthood of Egypt was not a religion, it was a science of soul, a living tradition built on observation, purification, initiation. And its greatest temple was not made of incense and fire. It was the pyramid. These priests understood something we have only begun to rediscover, that consciousness is not trapped in the skull. It is a field, a light, a flame to be tended and focused, and the pyramid was the lens that sharpened it. Within the sacred spaces of the pyramid, deep beneath the stone, these priests would work in silence, not chanting, not praying, but listening, measuring, attuning. They studied the harmonics of the earth. They mapped the alignments of the stars. They charted the flows of the Nile as if they were charting the arteries of a god. They believed Earth itself was alive, a body, a temple, and they treated it as such. Their rituals were not superstition, they were synchronization. They timed their ceremonies with equinoxes, solstices, lunar phases, and stellar risings, not out of mysticism, but because they knew timing is power. The high priests of Heliopolis and Memphis, of Abydos and Karnak, each held pieces of a greater truth. They did not own this knowledge. They served it, and they passed it not through writing alone, but through initiation, through living example. Some say they could see into the heart of a person without words, that their presence alone could change a room, that they spoke rarely, but when they did, it felt like thunder, wrapped in calm. What happened to them? When the empires fell, when conquests came, the temples were plundered, the scrolls burned, the priesthood dissolved, and with it the great transmission was scattered like dust across desert winds. But not entirely. Some pieces survived, hidden in myth, buried in symbol, encoded in the architecture itself. For the true priest knew this would come, and so they left messages, not in language but in structure, not in papyrus but in proportion, so that even if the names were lost, the truths would remain. We look to the pyramid and wonder, who built it? Perhaps the better question is, who remembered? Because to create such a monument required more than muscle. It required memory. Memory of the sacred laws that govern not just stone, but soul. Memory of how to open the human heart to the rhythm of the universe. That memory has not vanished. It lives in the silence between thoughts, in the breath between moments, in the part of you that knows there is more. The priests did not seek fame, they sought truth, and the pyramid was their prayer. When you step into its shadow, you step into their legacy. When you listen, not just with your ears, but with your being, you may begin to hear them, not with words, but with light. When we speak of Egypt, we speak of pharaohs, those golden figures seated between men and gods, robed in linen, crowned with symbols of eternity. But beyond the gold masks and stone statues was something deeper, a soul forged in the furnace of responsibility. The Pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was Ma'at in flesh, the balance of the cosmos, walking on earth. To wear the crown was not to bask in power, it was to bear the weight of divine order, to rule justly, to think cosmically, to protect harmony between heaven and earth. And for this, the Pharaoh had to be prepared, not politically, spiritually. The early pharaohs were initiated, trained not just in warfare and governance, but in awakening. They studied under priests, walked through rituals, spent nights alone in dark chambers, deep within pyramids, not to conquer fear, but to understand the self, because only the one who knew himself could hope to maintain balance for others. In hieroglyphs, the heart was more than an organ. It was the throne of the soul. At death, it was weighed against a feather. If the heart was light, free from lies, violence, pride, it would pass into eternity. But if heavy, with untruth, it was devoured by Amit, the soul crusher. This myth was more than morality, it was mirror, a way of life. The Pharaoh lived with this knowledge. Every choice mattered, every thought echoed, and in this tension between man and myth, the Pharaoh grew. Pyramids were not only built to house the body after death, they were constructed during life as tools for transformation. As a soul moved through the great corridors of the pyramid, so too did the Pharaoh move through the corridors of being. From youth to king, from man to symbol, from ego to servant. We imagine the pharaohs as prideful, but in truth, their greatest titles were acts of humility. Servant of Ma'at, son of the sun. These were not declarations of superiority, but of sacred responsibility. It is easy to forget this in our age. Power today rarely bows to wisdom. Leadership has become theater. But once, in the silence of the desert, under the gaze of eternal stars, leadership was ritual, and the pyramid was its crucible. Did every pharaoh live up to this ideal? Of course not. History is human. But the ideal itself, the blueprint, was carved in the stones. And the pyramid, silent as it is, still whispers it. That true power is not domination. It is stewardship. That kingship is not about glory. It is about sacrifice, and that the greatest throne a man can sit upon is not made of gold, but of truth. In this way, the heart of the Pharaoh beats still. Not in museums, not in mummies, but in us, in those who remember, in those who feel the ancient pull toward responsibility, reverence, and rightness. When you stand before the pyramid, you do not stand before a tomb, you stand before a promise that if even one soul can balance power with humility, ambition with virtue, form with spirit, then harmony can be restored, and civilization reborn. The desert is not empty. It is full of echoes, shadows, and truths too ancient for words. Beneath its golden sands lie the bones of stories that never reached parchment, forgotten cities, erased languages, footsteps of souls who touched the divine and left no sound behind. But the desert remembers, not like a book, like a wound, like a whisper. It holds time the way a priest holds breath during prayer, silent, sacred, complete. When the winds move across the Sahara, they do more than shift sand, they stir memory. They pass over broken obelisks, worn statues, half-buried temples. They sing to stones whose builders no longer have names. And in this haunting silence, a strange realization grows, that the earth itself mourns, not loudly, but faithfully. The desert has seen what we have forgotten, the rise of gods, the fall of empires, the madness of man, the wisdom of woman, the flowering of ideas that could have changed the course of time had they not been silenced by fire, conquest, or forgetting. Beneath the dunes of Saqqara and Dashur, sacred texts still sleep, unburned. Beneath Luxor and Thebes, untouched chambers pulse with stories yet untold. We walk upon them, unaware, thinking we know the past because we've read the summaries. But the soul of civilization does not live in summaries. It lives in depth. And that is what the desert keeps best. The ancients knew this. That is why they buried their truths in stone, not scrolls. Because stone resists time, scrolls burn, languages die, but geometry does not change, and silence cannot be destroyed. The desert taught them this patience. to plant ideas not like crops but like seeds beneath granite, to bury their greatest knowledge where only the humble, the dedicated, the quiet could find it again. That is why the pyramids still stand, because they were never only monuments, they were containers, memory vaults, resonance chambers, shaped to catch not just sunlight and shadow, but meaning, energy, consciousness. And this is what we forget when we study history as fact rather than as feeling. When we reduce civilization to dates, wars, and rulers and ignore the invisible threads that held it all together, faith, ritual, balance, purpose. The desert remembers because it holds contrast. Day and night, heat and chill, stillness and storm. These opposites sharpen the senses. They awaken intuition. In such a place, you begin to feel what the mind alone cannot grasp, that knowledge is not just accumulated, it is earned through silence, through time, through reverence. When you sit quietly under the stars of the Egyptian night, far from the cities, far from the noise, a strange clarity returns, the kind that has no words yet feels like truth. You realize you are not alone, that this land still listens, that the sand still sings, and that beneath your feet, the heart of something ancient still beats. The desert has waited thousands of years. It will wait thousands more, because it knows some will return, some will remember, some will listen, and in their listening, the silence will speak again. There comes a moment, often quiet, sometimes sudden, when a question rises within you that cannot be silenced. It's not loud, it's not forced, but it is persistent, ancient, and strange. The question is not, what did they build, or even how? The real question is deeper, why? Why build something that would outlive kings, empires, languages, even memory itself? Why align it to the stars with such precision? Why fill it with resonant chambers that hum with sacred math? Why leave it silent? Perhaps because the pyramid was never built to answer. It was built to provoke the question. Not every civilization reaches the point where it begins to ask not just how to survive, but why it exists at all. Egypt did, and when it did, it responded not with books, but with form, with silence, with symbols that require the seeker to earn their meaning. The pyramid was not just a tomb or a temple, it was a mirror held up to time. And in that mirror, a civilization asked itself, what is the soul? What is balance? What is eternity? These were not abstract inquiries. They shaped how Egyptians lived, ruled, healed, died. Their science and their spirituality were not separate. They were united in one question. How does the universe stay in harmony? And how can I live in tune with it? This is what we forgot. We divided knowledge, split the sacred from the scientific, made history a list of events instead of a living legacy. We forgot that civilizations rise and fall not just because of economics or warfare, but because of the questions they do or do not ask. When a people stop asking why they exist, they become hollow, directionless, easily ruled, easily distracted. But when a people remember to ask, truly ask, they awaken something ancient in themselves. And that is what the pyramid waits for. It was not made to be explained. It was made to awaken, to reintroduce the mystery, to challenge the modern world with something it cannot measure or monetize, the feeling of standing before a structure that should not exist, and yet does. The feeling that there is more, that time is layered, that history is not linear but sacred. In a world that drowns in noise, the pyramid does not speak, it waits. Because the truth it guards is not a secret, it is a silence so powerful, so vast, so eternal, that only the truly courageous, dare to enter it. And those who do are never the same again. In the end, all civilizations speak. Some speak through words, others through war, some through art, others through silence. Egypt chose silence, not because it had nothing to say, but because it knew the greatest truths are not spoken. They are remembered. The pyramid does not demand attention. It does not shout its brilliance or beg to be admired. It stands, unmoved, unchanged, undeniable. In that stillness lies its power. It does not argue with time. It transcends it. Millennia have passed. Sandstorms have stripped its surface. Invaders have chipped away its edges. The names of kings have faded. Empires have crumbled. Languages have vanished. But still it remains. And in that remaining, it teaches. It teaches that endurance is not about resisting change. It's about aligning with the eternal. It teaches that the highest wisdom is not always complex. It is often simple yet deep. It teaches that real power does not control others. It transforms self. This is what civilization forgot. Not how to build, but why to build. Not how to rule, but why to lead. Not how to survive, but why to live. The pyramid reminds us that human beings once looked to the stars and saw not just distance, but destiny. That once architecture was prayer. That geometry was not abstract, it was sacred. That matter was shaped not only by hands, but by vision, discipline, and reverence. You listening now are not separate from this legacy. You are its echo, its continuation, its living question. Because the silence of the pyramids is not just a mystery, it's a mirror. And when you stand before it, you're not just looking at the past. You're looking into the part of yourself that still remembers, that longs for meaning, that aches for truth. We have fast machines, loud cities, endless content. But have we built anything that will speak to the stars 10,000 years from now? Have we created anything that holds soul? The ancients did. With stone, shadow, and silence, they whispered eternity into being. And though we may have forgotten their language, the silence remains. The pyramid remains. The question remains, will we?